Jack Dallas had always thrived in chaos. For over 3 decades as a detective with the LAPD, he lived for the adrenaline of cracking impossible cases and bringing order to the darkest corners of the city. But retirement was a different beast. The days stretched endlessly, devoid of urgency, the silence in his small suburban home louder than the chaos he'd left behind. It didn't help that Megan, his wife of 34 years, was gone. 6 months after he hung up his badge, cancer took her swiftly. Jack was left with a house too big, memories too sharp, and a purpose too faded. Most days, Jack sat in his worn recliner by the front window, nursing black coffee and watching the world drift by. He could hear Megan's voice in his mind, playful but firm. "Jack, you'll turn into one of those cranky old men who yells at kids to get off his lawn." He chuckled dryly at the thought. Maybe she was right. But then, something unusual stirred his instincts. The house at the end of the street. It was a Victorian relic, its paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. For years, it had been an abandoned eyesore, the kind of place teenagers dared each other to approach on Halloween. But one evening, a sleek black Mercedes pulled into its driveway. Jack noticed it immediately. It was the first sign of life the house had shown in over a decade. The car's arrival was precise, always at 8 p.m. sharp. Its glossy exterior gleamed under the streetlights as it slipped into the garage, the door creaking shut behind it. No one seemed to exit or enter during the day. The lights stayed off. It was as if the house absorbed the car and its occupants, swallowing them whole. By the 4th night, Jack's curiosity had turned into obsession. He dug out an old notebook and began recording every detail: the car's make, model, and license plate, the exact times it arrived and departed, the faint sounds of movement, footsteps, muffled voices he sometimes caught in the stillness of the night. One evening, Jack spotted them. A man in his early 40s with a gaunt face and shadowed eyes climbed out of the driver's seat. He carried a duffel bag, his movements brisk and deliberate. A moment later, a young girl emerged from the passenger side, her bright red coat a stark contrast against the darkness. She clutched a stuffed animal, her gaze darting nervously as she followed the man into the house. Jack's detective instincts kicked into high gear. Who were they? Squatters? Criminals on the run? A father and daughter hiding from something or someone? Unable to shake his suspicion, Jack called in a favor from an old contact at the DMV. The license plate led him to a name: Mark Davis. The search revealed more: a tech entrepreneur whose life had unraveled after a high-profile scandal. Lawsuits had drained his finances, forcing him to sell everything. The girl was Emma, his niece, whose parents had died in a car crash 2 years earlier. With no one else to turn to, Mark had taken her in, and together they'd fallen off the grid. Jack felt a pang of empathy. They weren't criminals. They were survivors, but they were vulnerable, and vulnerable people often made desperate choices. Determined to learn more, Jack decided to confront Mark. Late one evening, he approached the house with a thermos of coffee and a peace offering, a bag of fresh bagels from the local deli. He knocked softly, the sound echoing in the quiet night. The door creaked open, revealing Mark's wary face. He looked older than his 40-something years, the weight of his struggles etched into his features. Emma peered out from behind him, clutching her stuffed bear. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Jack began, holding up the thermos like a white flag. "Thought you might want someone to talk to?" Mark hesitated, but eventually opened the door wider. They sat in the sparsely furnished living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Slowly, Mark shared his story: the lawsuits, the bankruptcy, the social ostracism. "I just needed to keep Emma safe," he said, his voice breaking. "She's all I've got left." Jack nodded, his mind already racing. He saw himself in Mark, a man trying to do the right thing in a world that didn't make it easy. Over the next few weeks, Jack became their lifeline. He reached out to his network, pulling strings and calling in favors. A retired social worker helped him find temporary housing for Mark and Emma. A local church donated clothes and toys. Jack even spent evenings teaching Emma how to play piano on an old keyboard he'd found at a thrift store. Emma warmed up to Jack quickly. Her laughter filled his once silent house, and she often brought him drawings she'd made, crayon depictions of herself, Mark, and Jack as a trio. Mark, however, struggled to accept help. "I don't want charity," he insisted one evening. evening as they shared coffee on Jack's porch. "It's not charity," Jack replied. "It's community. And trust me, it's easier to lean on someone now than to regret not doing it later." By Christmas, Jack had helped them move into a modest apartment on the other side of town. Emma was enrolled in a nearby school, and Mark had found work as a freelance programmer. They invited Jack over for dinner, a simple but heartfelt meal of spaghetti and garlic bread. Afterward, Emma played Silent Night on the keyboard, her small fingers hitting each note with careful precision. Jack watched her, a lump forming in his throat. For the first time since Megan's passing, Jack felt something stir within him. It wasn't just the satisfaction of helping Mark and Emma, it was the realization that he still had something to give. His years of experience, his resilience, his heart. As he walked home that night, the crisp winter air biting at his cheeks, Jack glanced back at the house on the corner. It no longer felt like an ominous mystery. Instead, it was a reminder, a beacon of second chances. But that night, Jack's peace was shattered by an unexpected knock at his door. A sheriff's deputy stood on his doorstep, holding a letter marked with an official seal. "Mr. Dallas?" the deputy asked, his tone respectful but firm. "Yeah," Jack replied, taken aback. "This letter is for you," the deputy said, handing it over. "It's urgent." Jack tore open the envelope. Inside was a legal notice, the kind that only appeared when something serious was at stake. It was from Mark Davis. "Mr. Dallas," the letter began, "I need your help. I didn't want to involve you in this, but things have escalated beyond what I can handle alone. They're coming for me, and I don't know how to keep Emma safe anymore. Please, we need you." Jack stood frozen for a long moment, the letter trembling in his hands. His mind raced, memories of old cases flooding back, cases where families were torn apart by forces beyond their control. He knew deep in his bones that this wasn't just another mystery to solve. This was a call for help. Without another word, Jack grabbed his coat, slammed the door behind him, and headed straight for Mark's apartment. Whatever was coming, he was going to face it head on. As Jack drove through the dark streets, his thoughts were a storm. What had Mark gotten mixed up in? What danger was Emma in? He had no answers, only the grim sense that time was running out. When he arrived at the apartment, it was eerily quiet. The lights inside were dim, and the curtains were drawn tightly. He knocked frantically on the door, but there was no answer. He turned the handle, unlocked. Inside, the apartment was empty. Mark and Emma were gone. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he looked around, searching for any clue as to where they had gone. On the floor, a single sheet of paper lay, half hidden under a table. Jack picked it up, his hands trembling. The note was short, but its meaning was crystal clear. "They've taken her, and now they're coming for me too. Help us, Jack, please." If you enjoyed this story and want to know what happens next, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated with all our latest content. Your support means the world to us. Let's solve this mystery together. Stay tuned for the next chapter.